Hi, I'm Pastor Ben. This is our fourth session of the Together Tuesday Adult Education class, How the Light Shines Through, here presented for those of you online who are not able to be here on Tuesday or who were here Tuesday but would like to review what we covered. This is roughly the same topic as the chapter 3 of this book, but I want to point out again that this class is not a summary of the book. It's simply the book is the resource for our conversation in this class, and there are many similarities, of course, but it really is not meant to be a replacement, but a supplement. So, as we think about what has happened in our society, and then what can the church do as opportunity, we need to continue to nuance what it is that has happened in society. And this portion of the book begins that shift into now what's happened, what is that as an opportunity for the church to an exhausted world. Well, to understand that, there's something that's important here that the book kind of circles around several times of a fundamental question. How has social media changed us? In the class, we did some brainstorming. And there's the way to think about this perhaps is the way people behave on social media, and then how has that changed our behavior not on social media? And that second piece is, for me, the really critical component. Because if it's just a behavior people have in social media, perhaps it would be easy to say, well, I'll just simply finally unplug from that and I'll be in a more healthful space. But the problem is that at least in some ways, if not completely, social media has changed the way we behave with one another when we're just in every aspect of life. Now, that could be overstated, but I think at least it has pointed out some bad behavior that we all have. We might have had it before social media became a thing, but it has certainly not helped, and it helps us illustrate some challenges. Because people behave differently, and some of it's good and some of it's bad on social media. For example, the speed by which people communicate on social media is simply accelerated. But I think there's several things going on. I want to give an example, and this example is neither good nor bad. It was just something I could pull up very easily online. Here is a post from Robert Reich, a political, or actually economic, political action kind of figure, who has a statement about Donald Trump, and I grabbed it because the day of class, it was from that day about an hour earlier. And if you look at this post, it's a statement. This is, you can agree or disagree with it, but my interest is it's a statement about a political issue that calling it news or fake news is inappropriate. It's a statement. It's just a statement anyone can make. But then look at the responses. It doesn't say how many people saw it, but as a public figure, he has a lot of followers. It says 25,000 people liked it. And then it says 2.4 thousand have commented upon it. And if you were to scroll through all those comments, they would be all over the place. The ones that have drifted to the top are those who are big fans of the statement, and therefore they are statements of support. But if you were to go through there, you'd have some strong statements of opposition as well. But if you were to compare this with what happens when a person in any kind of public space made a statement like this, well, they'd have reactions. Some would be positive, some would be negative. But one thing you wouldn't have is 2.4 thousand people expressing an opinion out loud in real time to that original statement. That doesn't work in real life. Social media encourages it. What's more, if you looked at it, if you were in a room together, why, if I make a statement, you respond, I might respond to you. Someone next to you might respond. And then you would say something new back to one another. Theoretically, in Facebook, you can do this. You can comment to the comments and comment, but it's so stuck on that one idea. It's not like you're a bunch of people in a room who are able to talk. No, it's just ideas back and forth at one another. What's more, it says 3.2 thousand people have shared this statement, and they're having their own conversations with other strangers or people they don't know especially well, all about the idea, and there is no sense that any of these people talking to one another know one another in any sense. It is simply the way in which an idea has spread and responded, and some people liked it with the thumbs up like, and are part of this movement, are not part of this movement, and it creates, in some ways, followers, non-followers. What's more, you might mention that the way Facebook works, and almost all social media works, is that it actually, even though it's available for everybody, it's not available for everybody. The way that our friend groups and the algorithms work, it actually separates us from different opinions, which is why this person making a statement has 25,000 likes, is because the people following him already probably like most of what he's about to say. And I don't want to make anything about this, but other than to say that that social media does have a different kind of discourse than real life. And one thing that many people do is that it's relatively low cost to make a comment on something on social media, and people often do very quickly, very instantaneously, and maybe don't completely think through exactly what they're about to say. And once it's out there and written out forever. And people 3 years later, in theory, could go back and have a problem with it. And social media encourages us in many ways to completely follow one person. And if you really don't like, in this case, what Robert Reich is saying, what would you do? You'd simply unfollow him. And so you just not get material and opinion from him, because after all, there's so much available. I want to hear what I want to hear about, and I don't want to hear what others have to say. And because we're not actually in a room of real community, well, it's really easy to do that. There's more aspects of the way we behave in social media. That's just an example for what one might do in social media. The concern is that this has become not just about social media, but about how we behave with one another. There's been a new phrase coming out called canceling. I'm not sure if I like the term, but that idea of, if I'm not in agreement with your ideals or the way in which you speak about them, I'm just gonna, in Facebook it would be unfollow. In real life it's just, I'm just not gonna interact with you anymore. And this tendency to cut people off, I don't think it's new, but social media has maybe shed a light on how that has happened in our own lives with one another. The isolationism that can happen on a social media page because you only follow things you like and not things you don't like is starting to come over into regular life, where I only interact with those who I tend to agree with and not with those who I tend not to agree with. And that has some challenging aspects. Further, and there's a lot more to say about social media, but further I want to get to how do we behave with one another, not with social media, is what, and this is not from the book, but one thing that I think has become so resonant and social media encourages is to focus far more on the way we speak rather than the way we act. There was an interview recently on the Ezra Klein show that was really talking about this. When we have fallen into victories of speech rather than victories of action. And it was an interview with Sarah McBride, who was talking about rights for trans community, and used this example that some of you will know who this is. This is Seth Moulton in the House of Representatives in Massachusetts 6th District. And there was a bill banning transgender people from, I believe, athletics. It might have been, I don't remember what element of athletics. And this Democratic congressman made a speech saying that he was very bothered by the idea of the trans athletes playing, and that he was very bothered he wasn't allowed to say that as a Democrat. And if you followed that at that time, the messaging on that, particularly in the left, went nuts on this particular congressman for that speech. But what was not usually also reported was that after saying that, he did vote against the ban, which is what those on the left wanted. But the speech was not what they wanted. And speech is difficult because he said some things that was language that maybe people truly did not like, didn't find helpful. But what was the goal? Was it a victory of speech or action? And the reason I think it's important is because of something that social media has really encouraged of the hashtag support of one particular thing or another is really an action of speech, not of action. There's very little you're doing by just that little follow thing. It's fine, and speech is valuable, but so frequently what that can lead to is an idea of purity of a movement. If you're going to follow me, I want to know why you're following me, and I want to say I completely agree with every aspect of it, and there's no real way for nuance or compromise. Go back to that example I had. You had a 2-sentence statement from a political figure. If you were actually to hear a real speech by that political figure, this speech would be nuanced. It would be careful, but not a 2-sentence statement. That's a little excerpt. And you can, well, in that case, it wasn't an excerpt. He wrote it, I think, or someone wrote it. One issue with social media very well might have been that person, might not have. In that case, I think it is, but you don't know. Somebody with the profile named that put that out there, but it's not overly nuanced. It's not a conversation. It's a statement. Well, if you are very interested in everyone in your movement thinking precisely the way you are, so that we are in complete agreement, and that you have increased the purity of the movement so that if you agree with 75% but disagree with 25%, you are pushed aside and outcast, well, you have a fundamental problem in how real life tends to work. And so this has been a major challenge, and I think something that has too frequently bled into our interaction with one another. Second thing is we often, and I don't know if this is a social media thing or just a human thing, this might not be very new at all, the assumptions of one's motives. I see something happening and I think I understand who you are because I know what kind of camp you're part of. This is incredibly dangerous, and I have this picture here because it's an example of, it was a documentary, and I am not an expert in this, that so-called infamous McDonald's case about the coffee, where a person burned their legs with coffee because it was hot and sued McDonald's and won the lawsuit. And it got used politically for a long time. Well, there was a documentary that came out later who looked at it carefully and said most people, the way they used that politically, did not understand the motives of the person, because most people assumed that the goal was to try to get rich. Well, what that person was actually suing for was just the cost, the medical bills that Medicare didn't pay. And it turned out that that this huge settlement wasn't going to that person. It was a punitive thing that was going on for that was not a payment to that individual, and that the situation wasn't about that person. It turned out there was a large number of people, because they had a policy of keeping their coffee so hot you'd have to get skin grafts. But anyway, the only reason is, you can think whatever you want. You can watch that documentary or not. It's all up to you. All the reason I put it out is, if we assume we know why someone is doing something, we frequently are wrong because we don't know why. And secondly, it falls into that first category again, purity of movement. Why is the emphasis more on why someone's doing something than what someone is doing? And if you was focusing on what they were doing, it would be different. And social media does encourage us to do that. I think in one camp rather than another. And there is a way we do this in real life. And it's in the term that, well, I think of as the term ideology or ideology. That sense of those, it's more than just the ideas someone has. An ideology are those things that are so embedded within myself that I hold to them to be true, even though I don't recognize them as being true. For example, for most modern Americans, something like the scientific method as the way that we can learn something and trust it is something that, yes, we did get taught it at some point, but it's so embedded in the way we think that it's hard to imagine not measuring, I just did it right there, measuring whether something is reliable based on a scientific method, is that we want to be able to observe something and observe it again and again and have some way to see whether or not that observation holds true. That is a particular way of thinking that we've found helpful for how we know things in the universe, but it's not necessarily the only way to think. But ideology is like that. The thing about ideology is these are the things we hold. And the ideal in ideological analysis is to recognize that I do have those things, bring them to the fore of my mind to say, do I agree with this? And say, oh, I actually do. I'm going to hold this and use it. But the thing about that is an ideology isn't a human. It's not a relationship. It's an idea. An idea doesn't have the ability to nuance like humans do. So take an example. How in social media we do this. We look for the idea rather than the human. Frequently on social media, that which comes to us are humans we don't know or have any relationship with. It's just the idea. Take a look at, this was a survey some years ago about younger adults and their associations of what Christianity was all about. This was a study by the Barna Group published in the book called Unchristian, where it said, what is Christianity known for? It said it was known for being anti-homosexual, judgmental, hypocritical, involved in politics, old-fashioned, insensitive, boring, not accepting or confusing. What's interesting to me is that a few of those are relational, but almost all of them are ideas. The ideas that people have of just what do they associate with Christianity. And the Barna Group calls those negative associations. Then there's some positive associations, such as values and principles, friendly, faith, love, hope, genuine, real. A little more of that is relationship, but still a lot about values and ideals. And what's striking is if you were to do this with anything else, if you were just to say, what do you associate Christianity is? What's not there is, this is a community who gathers usually on a Sunday. They do a particular kind of worship, nowhere presented here. Meaning, what do people actually do with one another in real life? It wasn't there. What was there were the ideals. What is it that people hold on one position or another? Well, this becomes a challenge, and I don't think this is new, but I do think social media does encourage that kind of thinking because it's all about what does one person say rather than another person say. You'll also notice here it's not much about what does the church do in society, in community, for an individual. It's not really about that. It's about the ideals. So then What does it mean for a response? And this is really the point of all this. There's a lot to be said about social media, about distance, about one another, the way people speak freely, too freely, maybe. One of the points he brings up in the book says maybe one of the best things we could do is give something 5 minutes before I respond, just to avoid that knee jerk that social media encourages. So what can the church do? What does it mean to be a winsome witness in a world that is struggling from some effects of things like social media, from social media in real life? So the first thing is, what about this purity of movement? That if you're not completely with us, then you're against us. Well, the church has an ability to recognize we start with the premise we aren't going to get this right. We are going to make mistakes, and we are a community built on forgiveness. That we are going to be a very mixed community. All are welcome here. And when we do that, we know we're going to fail. We are called to love our neighbors, and we live faithfully, but also fallibly. We are in a broken world, and we are built on the idea if you're not completely here yet, there's a place for you. And that is different. It is a community of forgiveness, of recognizing our own fallenness and recognizing that you are forgiven and loved. Secondly, assumption of people's motives. This is too frequently what the church does and what we are called not to do. When we talk about sharing the gospel and evangelism, most of that task, I would argue, is not us using words, it's us hearing words. That if the church can be known as a place where we listen to you, that this is about a relationship with you, to hear where you are. There's Bob Kolb wrote a book on evangelism, and one of his fundamental things is someone asks you something about Jesus, one of the best questions you could ask is, well, why are you interested? What would you like to know? Why would you like to know? Because people have a story and they're coming from a place, and we need to hear that. And we need to be a place where we can hear, and we can be a place where we're going to hear without criticizing immediately. This is an important lesson. We might think of Luther's explanation of the eighth commandment. The eighth commandment is, thou shalt not bear false witness. But Luther interprets it as follows. We are to fear and love God so that we do not tell lies about our neighbors, betray or slander them, or destroy their reputations. That part seems like it's similar to just bearing false witness, but then Luther goes on. Instead, we are to come to their defense, speak well of them, and interpret everything they do in the best possible light. That is the exact opposite of assuming motives. That is saying, I am respecting you, and I am going to take what you're saying in the best possible construction. And the church is called to be able to do that. And how different of a community would this be than a world in which you either completely agree with us or completely disagree? Instead, it's going to be, we're going to listen well. And we might end up disagreeing. It's okay for us to disagree, but I'm going to do it with the most charitable hearing rather than the least. And I'm not going to assume your motives. I'm really ready to hear your motives. And that is a very hard call for us, because sometimes it's very hard to hear what people are saying. But we are called to put the best possible construction, to come to another's defense and speak well of another even when we disagree. This is distinctive and different. And this is important because we need to get beyond just simply being part of a movement. Here's some, I don't know what protest this is, but this is some sort of protest of this movement of people who are all here for one particular purpose. In social media, people come for a particular purpose, especially when it's a following, unfollowing situation. That's not how people meet in real life. People meet in real life for any number of reasons, and they talk with one another. There's all kinds of conversations about big, important things and about very minute things. It's not a singularity of purpose at all. It's any number of things. This stock image here, I might look sort of like a work party to me of just all kinds of conversations happening. It's not singular because people aren't singular. Not only are we people who are varied, but we change our own minds. We're contradictory people. Not everything we say seems to make sense, but we are all of those things. And in real life, that's how we meet and work and act. And we have something in common with almost everybody. Just because we don't have something in common on one issue doesn't mean we don't have anything in common with people. That's being community. And what would it mean to be a community of faith that recognizes that? And then we should also recognize in real life, we don't just gather for the sake of gathering much. We gather to do something. Here's a few images. There's a group of people in a choir. Those people don't ideologically agree with one another necessarily. They come together to sing. They like singing. I don't know anything about that, but it's just, that's what a choir does. Or here you see someone in the workplace. People don't agree necessarily with one another in a workplace on all issues, even on many issues. But they work together because they're there for a purpose. There's someone at the grocery store. Here's someone having coffee. Where do people actually meet? And when we meet together to do something, we can have common ground. This is the author John Anazu talks about of can we move from the goal of finding consensus, which is to say agree on everything, to finding common ground? Can we all say, well, we come together for different reasons, but we do agree on a purpose, and let's work together? He uses the example here of Habitat for Humanity, where people from very different perspectives and reasons for supporting Habitat for Humanity come into one place and help build a house. And the reasons why people support this particular organization are really varied. Some don't like people on the streets, so they want to, because they don't like to see them or something. So we're going to go help build a house. Another does it out of, this is about helping our fellow human being. Very different reasons, but they come together and they build a house. And Anazu would argue, and while they're actually building that house, they learn to be in community together and learn that this other person, there might actually be some things we do agree on, even though we deeply disagree on other things. And more than that, we actually even agree on this purpose. We're here together. Maybe the reasons are different, but we can respect where someone comes, because if the focus is what we do rather than why we're doing it, then we can start to build relationships, because the point is about relationships. And that's what he would argue where ideological change actually happens. And we get beyond the idea of heroes and villains, but instead being relationship together. And that doesn't mean we accept everything. Absolutely not. Jesus calls us to, when we are offended, you do confront those for who has wronged you, but then if they repent, then you do forgive, and we live together. No one is getting canceled here in that sense. And if we think about the relationships we've had in our own lives that really endure for a long time, very infrequently is that because of ideology. It's because of the character of the relationship we have. And that nuance is more present than anything else. We disagree on a lot of things, maybe even fundamentally on principles of life, but we recognize we're complicated people and we live in a loving relationship backward and forward, and that there is more going on here than meets the eye. And his call to the church today is that's what it means to be a winsome witness. In a world that is ready to, or is continually challenging one another and not calling us to be in careful, nuanced conversation and relationship to do exactly that, to come to one another with a posture of listening, to come and put the best possible construction on another rather than the assuming a motive. That this is how the church can be a witness and to be doing evangelism and reaching the community around us, not from saying, I know what you need that you didn't think you need, but instead, let's listen. Who are you? Where are you? How can we be in relationship together? This has been the 4th installment in this video series. Look forward for more.